You're not fine. Your feet must hurt.
Not anymore.
Chicago is a white blur. Julian Hart, the AI CEO who keeps Winter Street safe, spots a thin girl pulling a shivering dog from traffic. In his warm car, she clutches a cracked snowflake locket with a faded Polaroid. Two college kids beneath an arch. One of them, Julian. Her eyes match his. Regret hits like black ice. Who is she to him, and what storm from his past is about to break? The week the polar air locked Chicago in glass, Julian Hart's days ran on the second hand of his watch. Wake before dawn. Row until the windows fogged. Suit pressed, tie quiet, hair neat. The car slid from the heated garage into a city the color of salt. On the back seat, a leather folio, a thermos of black coffee, and a tablet already speaking in graphs. He had built CityGuard AI to see winter before it struck, to catch the shimmer of black ice, the uneven step on a bus, the drift piling at a crosswalk. Chicago trusted his cameras more than the sky. He wore trust well, piercing blue eyes behind designer frames. Dark hair cropped close at the sides, more volume on top. Broad shoulders softened by a tailored Italian suit, white shirt, silk tie. He moved like order had a soundtrack. People stood when he stepped off an elevator. They called him visionary. He nodded, thanked them, made his voice easy in their ears. Under the voice lay quiet rooms that no soundtrack reached. "Morning, Julian," Dana said when the call connected. She was his COO, blunt in a way that could cut ice. "Morning," he said. "South Side sensor grid? Stable. West Ridge catching false positives in the whiteout. We patched. City Hall wants you at the briefing. 11. He looked out at the lake. A pewter plate rimmed in white. "Push to 11:30. I want to swing by the Lincoln Park bus corridor. If the city is going to trust our flags, I need to see what the cameras see." "Copy. PR asked if you can say something about generosity this season. Donations. You know how the week is." "I will talk about safety," he said, "and reminders to check on neighbors." His driver, Miguel, kept both hands on the wheel. The wipers fought ice. The car's heater hummed. Somewhere deep in his coat, the leather wallet pressed against his ribs. He almost never opened it. When he did, there was a years-old photograph, flattened small, the edges delicate. Two students in scarves under a campus arch. Laughter caught on film. He had promised things under that stone. Then graduation came like weather. Then work. Then time. When he tried to add the years up, he could feel the breath leave his chest. The office was glass and frost lines. He moved through the doors, nodded to security, kept his stride steady. Analysts stood around a wall of monitors. Blue maps pulsed with tiny red flags. "Bus 94, someone said. "Curb snow bulge, heightened slip risk." "Surface treatment scheduled for 17 minutes, another replied. "Patch just deployed to Senior Center Alley," Dana called from her desk. "False flag rate dropping." Julian stepped close to the screens and let the data settle in his eyes. He had made cameras that could tell the difference between a snowdrift and a shadow, a scuff mark and a thin glaze of ice. Still, he knew how winter could fool you. It whispered you were fine until you were suddenly on the ground. He had told city leaders that the work was humble. It was a lens focused on what the cold hid. A junior engineer approached, smiling too hard. "We got a thank you email," he said. "A grandmother on Belmont. She says your system warned her before the bus steps froze. She didn't fall this year." "That is the point," Julian said. He meant it. He felt it land and then sail past the quiet room inside him. He stepped back into the elevator. Miguel had the car warm. "Lincoln Park corridor," Julian said. "We will ride the bus line, slow through the intersections." "Road crews say whiteout bans," Miguel said. "We can wait 30. "If we wait every time winter threatens, we never see the truth of it," Julian said. "We will go slow." The garage door lifted. The wind reached in like a hand. Snowflakes moved sideways, thin as needles. Drivers tapped brakes and hoped. Bare trees bowed to a sky that would not soften. He took off his gloves, pressed his palms to the heater vents, and watched the city dissolve, then reform. On the dashboard, a small crack ran through the plastic like a lightning fork. He traced it with a thumb without thinking. He thought of the photograph in his wallet, how the edges had started to fray, how a life could be made of edges you meant to mend. There were things he had not looked for. That was the truth. He had stood beneath one arch and then built his own out of glass and screens, and some nights the glass was so clear he could see what was missing. The light changed. The car rolled forward. Whiteout swallowed the next block, then spit it back out. A bus fishtailed 2 lanes over, straightened, and groaned past. A figure blurred in the corner of his vision. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing, and felt something in the quiet room shift, just slightly, like a door testing its hinge in a gust. The wind howled down Lincoln Park like it wanted to carve the city clean. Miguel's hands tightened on the wheel as the bus ahead skidded, its tires screaming over ice. "Hold on," he muttered, foot steady on the brake. The car jolted to a stop just shy of a spinning bumper. Through the white curtain of snow, Julian saw movement, a thin silhouette, small against the storm. A girl, maybe 12 or 13, tugged at a leash. A mutt, skinny, mottled, trembling, slid on the ice beside her. The child's coat was 2 sizes too big, the zipper broken halfway. Bare ankles flamed red above sneakers soaked through. Julian opened the door before Miguel could protest. The air hit him like shards. His breath turned to mist. "Sir, please stay in the car," Miguel said, but Julian was already out, stepping into wind that stung his face. The snow clawed sideways, slicing visibility to arm's length. He called out, voice low but clear. "Hey, careful, you'll freeze out here." The girl turned. Her cheeks were blotched with cold, lips cracked, eyes defiant. "Bus almost hit him," she said, pointing to the dog. He ran into the road. Julian crouched, coat whipping around his legs. "You did good," he said. "Let's get you both out of the wind." She hesitated, tightening her grip on the leash. "We're fine," she murmured. "You're not fine," Julian replied gently. "Your feet must hurt." Her answer came quiet, almost swallowed by the wind. "Not anymore." That line did something to him. He felt it in his chest, an echo of every promise he'd broken to himself about being too late, too busy, too far gone. He reached out a gloved hand. "Come on. My car's warm. You can bring your dog." Her eyes flicked to the black sedan, hesitant but searching for warmth. Finally, she nodded. Miguel jumped out to open the rear door, muttering a prayer in Spanish about stubborn rich men and frozen nights. Julian guided the girl in first, then the dog, whose paws left faint prints of blood and salt on the sidewalk. The scent of wet fur filled the cabin as the door closed, sealing them in heat. "Name?" Julian asked, pulling off his gloves. "Lena," she said softly, holding the mutt close. "This is Rocket." Julian smiled faintly. "Rocket. Strong name." Rocket whimpered and curled tighter against her chest. Lena's fingers shook, blue at the knuckles. Miguel turned the heat up higher. "We can stop at the shelter off Clark," he said. "Get them help." Lena tensed. "They don't let dogs in." Julian noticed how she said it, with the certainty of someone who'd already tried. He didn't push. Instead, he slipped off his wool coat and draped it over her shoulders. It looked enormous on her, swallowing her small frame. "Better?" he asked. She nodded, eyes down. "Thank you." The heater blew warm air through vents, frosting the windows with condensation. For the first time, Julian studied her face. Narrow, delicate, half hidden beneath messy dark hair. She was too thin, too quiet, but her expression was composed, even proud. And then he saw it, a silver chain slipping from beneath the collar of her coat. Something dangled from it, a cracked snowflake-shaped locket, edges worn, hinge crooked. Lena saw his gaze and clutched it instinctively. "It's my mom's," she said. She told me never to lose it. Julian's heart skipped. May I? She hesitated, then opened it herself. Inside, under scratched glass, was a tiny, faded Polaroid. 2 college students laughing under a stone arch. The boy's arm around the girl. The snowlight, the grin, the posture. It hit him like a punch. The boy in the picture was him. The girl was Renee Park. He hadn't spoken her name aloud in almost 15 years. Back then, she'd been the scholarship genius with the winter bright eyes, his partner in every late-night coding session, every dream that didn't survive graduation. One summer, she'd said, "I'll come find you when we've both built something worth showing." Then she disappeared. No call, no letter. Julian's throat closed. "Where did your mom get this?" he asked quietly. Lena glanced down at the photo, tracing the arch with her thumb. "She said it was the day everything began," she murmured. She used to sing when radiators hissed, said it made her feel close to him, but she stopped when she got sick. The car idled, the world outside a storm of white. Inside, the heat hummed. Rocket sighed, and Julian's past stared back at him through the eyes of a girl who had his own. "Lena," he said softly, voice trembling despite himself. "Where's your mom now?" Lena reached into her pocket and pulled out a worn envelope. Edges frayed, ink smudged, a single letter R written in neat script on the front. "She told me to keep this safe," she whispered. "It's where we used to live, before she couldn't anymore." Julian took it gently, fingers brushing the familiar handwriting that stopped his breath cold. The name, Renee Park. The address, South Side near the river. Outside, snow lashed against the glass, blurring everything but her face and the photograph in her trembling hands. Julian realized the storm outside wasn't half as powerful as the one breaking open inside him. The storm tapered just enough for the car to crawl south, wipers groaning under sleet. Julian sat in silence, the cracked locket still vivid in his mind. Renee's handwriting on that envelope. It was unmistakable, every loop and slant engraved somewhere in his memory. Beside him, Lena held Rocket close, whispering to calm him as if she'd done it 1,000 nights before. They reached the South Side walk-up near dusk. The building leaned under the weight of years. Paint peeling, steps crusted with snow, mailboxes jammed with junk flyers. Julian stared up at the narrow windows, breath fogging. "You lived here?" he asked softly. Lena nodded. "For a while, until last winter." Her voice thinned. "Mom got sick. I tried to keep her warm, but the heat went out. We stayed in a church basement after that." Julian's throat tightened. "You said she got sick. What kind of sick?" Lena's eyes drifted to the cracked steps. "They said pneumonia. Then something about her lungs. She was tired all the time." A pause. "She stopped going to the clinic. Said they'd just send a bill she couldn't pay." Julian closed his eyes. His company had mapped entire cities to predict frostbite zones, and yet he hadn't seen this. Not her, not them. He took a breath. "Do you have any other family?" Lena shook her head. "Just Rocket." Inside the car, Miguel cleared his throat. "Boss, maybe we, call someone? The city can help." Julian opened his wallet, pulled out his own Polaroid, creased, years old, kept flat against leather. It matched the one in Lena's locket, only half of the same picture. The tear was jagged, but the snowflakes between them aligned. Proof too cruel to doubt. He slipped it back in his pocket. "We'll get help," he said, steady now. "Real help." That night he placed a call to an old college friend turned private investigator, a man named Collier. "I need a search," Julian said. "Woman, Renee Park, former U of C student. Lived South Side until last year. Any hospital admissions, shelters, eviction records, anything." "Sure thing," Collier said, surprise lacing his tone. "You never ask for personal cases, Hart." Julian hesitated. "This one is different." He hung up and looked at Lena, who had drifted to sleep in the back seat, Rocket curled at her feet. The girl's face, relaxed now, looked heartbreakingly familiar. René's cheekbones, his eyes, a combination he'd never imagined seeing. He whispered, "René, why didn't you tell me?" 2 days later, Collier met him in the dim back booth of a cafe near the university. Steam rose from mugs that went untouched. "I tracked a lot of paper trails," Collier said. "Eviction notice from last winter, unpaid clinic bills, an ER discharge. Neighbors remember a girl with a dog said her mom played guitar sometimes, sang when the radiators hissed." Julian's jaw clenched. "And René?" Collier sighed, sliding a folder across the table. "Last record, urgent care on a freezing night 11 months ago. She checked out against medical advice. The nurse said she kept repeating 2 names. Lena. Julian. Then she walked out. No forwarding address." Julian stared at the folder, the edges blurred. "Dead?" "No record of that," Collier said carefully. "But..." The nurse thought she didn't have long. The air between them felt heavier than the snow outside. Julian nodded once. "Thank you." When he returned home, the city glimmered in ice. The penthouse windows reflected nothing but his own face. Tired, colorless, haunted. On his desk lay a sealed lab kit he'd arranged hours earlier. A cheek swab, a chain of custody. He knew what he'd find, but the man he'd become demanded evidence. He turned the envelope in his hands. René's R shimmered faintly beneath the lamplight. He whispered to the empty room, "You still write like you mean every word." By morning, the city woke to minus 15 degrees. Julian's phone buzzed. Collier again. "Courier picked up the sample. We'll have confirmation tomorrow." "Thank you." Julian hung up, staring out at the skyline. It was almost cruel how beautiful winter looked from above, streets laced in frost, lights glittering through mist. He thought of René humming over a broken radiator, of Lena's bare ankles on an ice-crusted street. He whispered to the glass, "I built an empire to fight cold, and I missed the only storm that mattered." When the lab results arrived that night, they were stark and mathematical. Probability of paternity, 99.9%. Julian exhaled, the sound half a laugh, half a sob. The papers trembled in his hands. He sank into his chair and pressed his palms over his eyes. "René," he murmured, voice cracking. "I found her. I found our daughter." Outside, wind scratched against the windows, but for the first time in years, Julian felt something warmer than ambition move through him, a vow forming quietly in the hollow where regret had lived too long. The results lay open on Julian's desk, words stark and undeniable. Probability of paternity, 99.9%. He read them again under the soft hum of city lights, as if repetition could dull their weight. It didn't. The truth wasn't new. It had lived somewhere deep inside him since the moment Lena had opened that cracked locket, but seeing it quantified made it real in a way that numbers rarely were. Julian Hart, the man whose algorithms could forecast danger before it struck, had failed to predict the one life that truly mattered. He closed the file slowly, hands trembling just enough to betray him. Then, with quiet precision, he reached for his phone. "Dana," he said when his COO answered. His voice was steady, but she could hear something off. "Cancel my morning briefings. Push everything 24 hours. "Everything?" she asked. "You have city procurement tomorrow, Julian. And the Safety Council dinner." "Push it." He didn't elaborate. "Family emergency." Dana hesitated. "Is everything all right?" Julian looked toward the window where snow drifted in lazy spirals against the glass. "No," he said softly, "but it will be." He hung up and exhaled. Beneath the professional armor, beneath the perfectly measured tone and the immaculate image, was a man who had loved once, truly loved, and then let silence become a wall too high to climb back over. His daughter was sleeping in a spare room down the hall. He rose, walked past the quiet hum of the condo, and paused at the door where a sliver of warm light slipped out from under the frame. He knocked gently. "Come in," came a sleepy voice. Lena sat cross-legged on the couch, Rocket's head resting in her lap. The dog's tail thumped twice against the rug. She looked small, but alert, the glow of a lamp painting her face in gold. Julian took a careful step inside. Couldn't sleep? Lena shrugged. Rocket snores. She smiled faintly, then studied him. You couldn't either. He smiled back, but his eyes were tired. You're right. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was tentative, like the first steps onto ice that might hold. Julian sat across from her. Lena, he began, voice soft. I had a test run today. A DNA test. Her shoulders tensed, hands curling slightly around Rocket's fur. Why? Because I needed to be sure, he said honestly. Not for me, for you. She didn't move, didn't speak, but her breathing changed, quieter, sharper. Julian continued, choosing each word like a fragile thing. It confirmed what I already knew. You're my daughter. The sentence landed like snow on frozen ground. Silent, absolute. Lena blinked. Once, twice. My mom, she told me you used to build things that could see storms coming, she said finally. She said you saw everything before it happened. Julian swallowed hard. She gave me too much credit. She said you'd come one day, when the world got quiet enough for you to listen. That broke him. He looked down, blinked fast, then forced himself to meet her gaze. I'm sorry, he whispered, for not being there, for the winters you had to survive without me, for everything. Lena's eyes filled but didn't spill. She never said you didn't care, she murmured. She said life got cold sometimes, even for the warmest people. Julian took a shaky breath. She was right, and I can't change the past, but I can show up now, if you'll let me. For a long moment, Lena said nothing. Then she looked at Rocket, at the coat he'd given her folded on the chair, and back at him. You really mean that? With everything I have? She nodded slowly, then whispered, okay. Julian felt his chest loosen, not healed, but open. The next morning, he called a meeting in the glass-walled boardroom of a North Star AI. Frost framed the skyline behind him. The executive team sat with tablets glowing, expecting another data-driven briefing. Instead, Julian spoke without slides. I founded this company to keep people safe, he began, to prevent the kind of tragedies that cold brings to those who can't afford to wait for help. But this week, I was reminded that safety isn't just infrastructure, it's presence. It's showing up. Dana frowned slightly. Julian, is this about the South Side expansion plan? No, he said quietly. It's about perspective and priorities. A murmur rippled through the room. Someone mentioned PR optics, someone else contracts. Julian raised a hand. You can quote me on this, he said. No project, no algorithm, no quarterly report is worth more than one life that slips through the cracks, especially when it's one you love. When the meeting ended, the boardroom was silent, but changed. That evening, Julian stood at his penthouse window again. Chicago glowed below, harsh, beautiful, alive. Lena's laughter carried faintly from the kitchen as she fed Rocket bits of chicken. For the first time in a decade, his home sounded like a place where someone lived. He turned toward the warmth, toward the small, fragile new world taking shape inside his walls. Tomorrow, he'd begin rebuilding from there. Julian hadn't expected that rebuilding would start with hesitation. The next morning, Lena stood by the window watching snow blur the skyline. Rocket's nose pressed against the glass. She wore one of his oversized sweaters. The sleeves swallowed her hands. He had arranged for breakfast, fresh fruit, eggs, hot cocoa, but she hovered near the edge of the table as if unsure whether it was truly meant for her. Go ahead, he said softly. It's all yours. She nodded, spooned a little onto her plate, and whispered, We used to share one sandwich. Mom always gave me the bigger half. Julian froze for a second, the sentence landing harder than she knew. He cleared his throat. You don't have to ration anything here, okay? She nodded again, but still ate slowly, polite, careful not to spill. After breakfast, she sat cross-legged on the floor with Rocket, whispering to him while Julian checked messages. City officials were asking for his presence at a crisis summit about frozen transit lines, and investors wanted reassurance after rumors of a data glitch. He typed short, professional replies. Handled. Update soon. But the weight of his new truth kept pressing at the edges of every decision. At noon, Collier called. "Found something," he said. "You'll want to hear it in person." They met at a small diner in Bronzeville, the kind with fogged windows and coffee that could dissolve sleep. Collier slid a folder across the table, same one from before, but thicker now. "Your Renee," he said, tapping the top sheet, "was last seen at St. Mark's Shelter 6 months ago. She stayed 3 nights, left with medication she couldn't afford to refill. A volunteer said she talked about getting her girl somewhere warmer. After that, nothing." Julian's pulse thudded. No death certificate? No hospital intake? Collier shook his head. "Nothing official. The shelter nurse remembered her saying she didn't want her daughter growing up under fluorescent lights." Julian stared at the steam rising from his mug. She'd been alive. Out there. Possibly long enough to send Lena away to survive alone. "She kept that locket," Collier added quietly. "Said it was her North Star." Julian rubbed his eyes. "She was my compass, too. I just forgot how to read it." That night, he couldn't focus on the spreadsheets open on his desk. His AI network mapped every frozen alley, every dark bus stop, every hazard across Chicago, but not the hidden corridors where people like Renee had slipped away. He turned to his wall of monitors. One map pulsed red. Shelter capacity alerts during sub-zero nights. He clicked through. The numbers told him what Renee had lived. Not enough beds, not enough warmth, not enough mercy for those with a dog or dignity. A sudden clarity hit him. He picked up the phone. "Collier," he said, "get me contact info for the nurse at St. Mark's. And start tracing medical supply donations from last winter. Renee might have left a paper trail in charity records or clinics that didn't log her full name." "On it," Collier replied. When Julian hung up, Lena appeared at his door. "You're still working?" she asked. He turned from the screens. "Trying to understand something." "About Mom?" He nodded. "I don't want her to be another missing name in a file." Lena stepped closer. She used to say, "People disappear when no one keeps looking." Julian swallowed hard. "Then I'll keep looking." She hesitated, then climbed onto the chair beside him, Rocket curling at her feet. Together, they watched the network of glowing dots, the city breathing in cold patterns. Lena tilted her head. "Are those the places where people fall?" "Sometimes," he said. "But I want them to be the places where people get found." Her eyes flicked to his. "Can you teach me how to read them?" Julian blinked, surprised. "You want to learn code?" She shrugged. "I like patterns. Mom said my dad did too." He smiled. Small, real, the first unguarded one in years. She wasn't wrong. Over the next week, the city's cold deepened. The mayor called a state of emergency. Reporters buzzed about blackouts. Julian split his time between the control center and home, balancing crisis response with quiet dinners where Lena read old library books aloud. Each night, the distance between them shrank by a fraction. One shared laugh, one memory, one moment when she forgot to stay guarded. But the search for Renee lingered like frost on the edge of every thought. One evening, Collier called again. "I tracked a nurse who remembers her, said Renee left a donation before she went. A letter in an envelope marked for you." Julian's grip tightened on the phone. "Where is it now?" "At the shelter office. They never had an address to send it." Julian's breath caught. "I'll pick it up first thing tomorrow." When he hung up, Lena was in the doorway, Rocket pressed to her leg. "You found something," she said quietly. He nodded. "Maybe a message." She looked down. "From her?" "Yes." Lena's voice trembled. "Then I want to read it too." Julian's throat ached. You will. He looked out the window at the snowfall thickening again, the city vanishing under white. Somewhere in that storm, a woman he once loved had written a final truth and left it waiting. Tomorrow, he'd finally face it. The next morning broke sharp and pale, sunlight diffused through ice. Chicago shimmered in frost so thick it looked painted on. Julian drove himself for once. No driver, no assistant, just him, the steering wheel, and the envelope that waited somewhere in a shelter office on the south side. Lena sat quietly in the passenger seat, Rocket curled on a blanket between them. The heater hummed. You don't have to come, Julian said, eyes on the road. She hugged her knees. I want to. He nodded. The silence that followed wasn't cold. It was cautious, the kind shared between two people learning to breathe in the same rhythm again. Snow crunched beneath the tires as they pulled into the parking lot of St. Mark's Shelter. The brick building hunched under the weight of snowdrifts, windows fogged, an old cross faintly visible through the frost. A handwritten sign by the door read, Welcome all. No one turned away. Inside smelled of detergent and coffee. Volunteers moved quietly between cots. A woman in her 50s, bundled in 2 sweaters, greeted them. You must be Mr. Hart, she said, her tone both respectful and curious. We spoke on the phone. Julian nodded. You knew Renee Park? The woman's expression softened. We all did. Sweet voice, gentle spirit. Used to sing the little ones to sleep when the pipes rattled. I wish we could have done more for her. She reached under the counter and handed him a small, sealed envelope, the edges worn. On the front, written in delicate, looping script, were the words, For Julian, if he ever comes. Lena's fingers tightened around his sleeve. Julian swallowed hard, turning the envelope over in his hands. He could feel the indentation of her pen strokes. Small, careful, familiar. Did she say anything before she left? He asked. The nurse hesitated. Only that she hoped this would find you, and that her girl was smart enough to survive until you did. Julian's throat constricted. Thank you, he whispered. They stepped back into the brittle daylight. Lena waited until they reached the car before speaking. Can we read it now? Julian nodded, sliding into the driver's seat. He broke the seal slowly, almost reverently, and unfolded a single page. Renee's handwriting unfurled across it, uneven but graceful. He began to read aloud. Julian. If you're reading this, it means you finally found us, or at least her. I hope she's safe. I hope she still hums to herself when it's cold. I couldn't keep her warm anymore. The world got too heavy for one pair of hands, but I tried. You once told me your work would keep people from slipping in the snow. I thought that was beautiful, even if I never said it. But life doesn't always give us level ground. Sometimes it gives us storms. Lena was my calm in every one of them. I didn't tell you about her because I was scared. Scared you'd choose duty over her, over me. Maybe that was selfish, but I kept the hope that you'd find her when the world got quiet enough for you to listen. If she ever finds you first, don't let her think she's an interruption. She's the best thing we ever made. Keep her warm, Julian. Keep her laughing. Renee. Julian's voice faltered halfway through, and by the end, his breath shook too much to speak. He handed the letter to Lena. She read it silently, lips trembling. She knew you'd come, she whispered. He turned to her, tears glinting behind his glasses. Not soon enough. Lena leaned over the console, clutching the letter against her chest. She said you'd keep people safe, she murmured. Maybe that's how she forgave you. Julian closed his eyes. Then the least I can do is make her right. They sat there for a long time, the car engine idling, snow falling soft as ash. That night, back at the penthouse, Julian framed the letter and placed it on the mantel. He couldn't stop reading one line over and over. Don't let her think she's an interruption. He turned to Lena. You're not, he said quietly. You're the reason I'm finally paying attention. Lena gave a small, tired smile. Then, can we do something for her? Julian tilted his head. Like what? She used to say that warmth starts with sharing. We could help other people like her. Julian looked at her, the resolve in her eyes so much like Renee's, and nodded. We will. He stood before the wide glass window, city lights shimmering below. The storm still howled beyond the glass, but inside, for the first time in years, warmth had a name and a purpose. Tomorrow, he would call his engineers. Tomorrow, he would begin a project Renee would have believed in, a network that didn't just predict storms, but reached into them. Julian woke before dawn, the city still half asleep under a sheet of white. The heater hissed softly, filling the penthouse with the smell of brewed coffee and something faintly metallic, the scent of cold metal thawing. He stood at the window, Renee's letter folded neatly in his hand. The words had settled into him overnight, not as pain, but as direction. He had built systems that saw risk, not people. That would change today. By the time Lena padded into the kitchen, hair messy, Rocket trailing behind her, Julian was already at the table sketching notes on a legal pad. Diagrams, arrows, scribbled phrases. Real-time alerts tied to shelter data. Pet-friendly zones. Youth access terminals. Are you drawing robots? She asked sleepily, rubbing her eyes. He smiled faintly. Not quite. These are ideas for something new. A system that doesn't just warn people where ice might be, but tells them where warmth already is. Lena frowned. Like shelters? Yes, but better, Julian said, gesturing for her to come closer. The city tracks which shelters are full, but it's all manual. I want to integrate it into the same AI that predicts frost hazards. When the system detects temperatures below 10 degrees, it will highlight nearby shelters with available beds and send alerts to buses, train stations, and emergency responders. Lena tilted her head, intrigued. So people won't have to guess where to go. Exactly. She smiled. Mom would have liked that. Julian's voice softened. That's the idea. He paused, studying her. You know, you sound like her when you talk about helping people. Lena looked down. She said kindness was free heat. Julian's throat tightened. She wasn't wrong. By mid-morning, the boardroom at North Star AI filled with executives. Dana sat at the head of the table, brows raised as Julian entered with a rare kind of intensity. No slides, no preamble, just a folder labeled Warm Signal. I'm proposing a new division, he said. We'll develop an integrated winter rescue platform combining our predictive tech with real-time shelter data, public transit signals, and pet accommodation registries. Dana leaned forward. Pet accommodations? Yes, Julian said. You'd be surprised how many people won't seek shelter because they can't bring their animals. We can fix that. One of the directors frowned. Julian, this isn't exactly profitable. City contracts don't pay for compassion. Julian looked up, voice calm but resolute. Some things pay in a different currency. Another board member cleared his throat. Optics matter. The media's already watching you after that rescue story went viral. Some might think this is damage control. Julian met his gaze squarely. Then let them. We'll still save lives. Dana studied him for a moment, then exhaled. You're serious? I am, he said, and I want the first center named after someone who understood warmth better than anyone I've ever met, Renee House. The room fell silent. A few exchanged glances. Finally, Dana nodded. Then let's start drawing up the pilot plan. Julian felt something ease in his chest. For once, the meeting ended not with applause or projections, but quiet respect. That night, he returned home exhausted but lighter. Lena was on the floor, surrounded by Rocket's toys and an old sketch pad. She looked up as he came in. How'd it go? She asked. He smiled. We're building something new. And your mom's name will be on it? Lena's eyes widened. Really? He nodded. Renee House. Warm shelters, open doors, and no one turned away for having a pet. She grinned. She used to say Rocket was her heater with fur. Julian chuckled softly. Then Rocket just became part of the mission statement. He sank onto the couch beside her, watching her draw. "What's that?" She held up the sketch pad, rough lines forming a layout. If the shelters have dog areas, the doors should have sensors low enough for them to trigger heat lamps when they come close, so no one's ever scared to walk in. Julian stared at the drawing. "That's brilliant. Think your engineers could build it?" He smiled, a rare warmth in his eyes. "I think you just joined the design team." She giggled, a sound that melted the air between them. Rocket barked once, as if in agreement. Later that evening, as the wind howled outside, Julian tucked the letter into a new frame beside the sketch. He looked out over the city, glittering, frozen, waiting. Renee's words echoed in his mind. Keep her warm. Keep her laughing. He turned to see Lena lying on the couch, Rocket asleep at her feet, a faint smile on her face. He whispered, almost to himself, "I'm trying, Renee, and this time I won't stop halfway." Outside, the first alert pinged from the prototype system, a signal marking the opening of a new emergency shelter downtown. A small dot blinked red, then green as warmth found its coordinates. For the first time in his life, Julian felt he was finally doing more than predicting storms. He was guiding people through them. The next morning, snow fell softer, still relentless but somehow less cruel. Julian's penthouse smelled like cinnamon oatmeal and fresh coffee. He'd cooked for the first time in years, awkwardly following an online recipe, spilling half the sugar, and laughing quietly when Lena had to correct him. Now she sat across from him at the kitchen island, eating slowly, bundled in a blanket. Rocket dozed under her chair, his tail twitching with small, contented dreams. Julian leaned back, watching her. She looked healthier already, the sharpness in her cheeks fading, a faint color returning. He thought of the hospital bills Renee hadn't been able to pay and felt a pang of guilt that money, once an abstract measure of success, had failed where love should have stepped in. He cleared his throat. "How are your feet?" She smiled. "Warm." He exhaled, smiling faintly. "Good. That's my favorite answer today." After breakfast, he left briefly for a meeting, but returned by noon, a large box in his hands. He set it gently on the floor. "What's that?" Lena asked, curious. "Open it." She knelt, untied the twine, and peeled back the lid. Inside lay a pair of insulated winter boots, small, black, and sturdy, the kind that could stand up to the meanest Chicago wind. Her eyes widened. "They're for me?" "Try them on," he said. She slipped them over thick socks, wiggling her toes. "They're perfect. They're made for people who walk through storms," he said quietly. She looked up at him. "So, for Mom, too." He swallowed hard. "Yes, for her, too." Lena's smile faltered just a little. She always said storms don't end. You just learn where to stand. Julian nodded, voice low. "Then let's build a place where everyone has somewhere to stand." Later that afternoon, they visited the construction site that North Star AI had leased for the pilot project, an abandoned maintenance depot off Halstead. The space smelled of rust and old salt, but to Julian it felt like promise. Lena followed him through puddles of melted ice, Rocket prancing between them. "You really think people will come here?" she asked. "They will," he said, "when they realize the doors are open for everyone." She stopped near the wall, brushing her fingers over the cracked paint. "Mom and I used to sleep behind buildings like this," she murmured. "When the shelters said no dogs, sometimes the wind sounded like it was calling names." Julian turned to her, eyes soft. "Then let's make sure no one ever hears that wind again." He showed her the digital model on his tablet, a map of heating zones, sleeping pods, and entry sensors. "These will open automatically when someone approaches with an animal," he explained. "No paperwork, no questions." Lena studied the design. You could add a bell tone when the door opens, a warm one, like a piano note. He smiled. You're officially co-designer now. Her face lit up, the first genuine excitement he'd seen in her. Can I name the tone? Absolutely. She thought for a moment. Call it Radiator Song. He blinked, surprised, and then smiled. Your mom would have loved that. Back home that evening, snow began again, tapping softly against the glass. Lena sat curled on the couch, Rocket's head in her lap, while Julian worked nearby. But this time, he wasn't lost in spreadsheets. He was building something personal, drafting a letter to the city council proposing a network expansion for Warm Signal Chicago. The opening lines came easily. When cold becomes a crisis, warmth must become a right. He paused, then wrote on. We have the technology to map risk. Now we need the heart to map refuge. When he finished, he leaned back, rubbing his temples. Across the room, Lena was humming quietly, the same melody Renee used to hum when radiators hissed in winter. He hadn't heard it in over a decade. It broke something open inside him, but gently this time. Hey, he said, turning toward her. That song, you remember all of it? She nodded. She used to sing it when the lights went out. Julian listened for a moment. Then he said softly, Would you teach me the words? She tilted her head, surprised. You sing? Not well, he admitted, but I'd like to try. So she did. Line by line, in her quiet, clear voice, she passed the song to him, their shared inheritance. Julian followed awkwardly at first, but by the final verse, their voices blended into something that felt like forgiveness made audible. When the last note faded, he looked at her and smiled. You know, you sound just like her. Lena smiled back. You don't. He laughed softly, eyes warm. Fair. Outside, snow blanketed the city again, but inside that penthouse, filled with laughter, a dog's sigh, and the faint hum of hope, it finally felt like home. Tomorrow, construction on Renee House would begin, and for the first time in years, Julian wasn't thinking about what he'd lost, but what he could still build. The morning broke bright and brittle, sunlight bouncing off snow so fierce it turned the whole skyline white. Chicago's cold was still merciless, but the world inside Julian's penthouse had changed. The silence that once echoed through every corner now carried warmth. Footsteps, laughter, the scrape of a cereal spoon against a bowl. Lena was sitting on the rug. Rocket sprawled beside her, finishing her homework from the tutoring program Julian had quietly arranged. Her hair framed her face in soft tangles, cheeks flushed from the space heater humming nearby. She looked up when Julian walked in, coffee in hand. Morning, Dad, she said. The word came out shy, like a test. Julian stopped mid-step. Dad. He had imagined that word before, sometimes with guilt, sometimes with longing, but never thought he'd actually hear it. Morning, Lena, he said, voice softer than he meant. That sounded nice. She grinned, eyes bright. You like it? I do, he said, smiling back. Very much. Rocket barked once as if seconding the motion. That afternoon, the elevator to the North Star headquarters opened to chaos. Reporters swarmed the lobby, their voices sharp as sleet. Mr. Hart, is it true the rescue story was staged? Was the girl in that viral photo a PR stunt for your new shelter initiative? Is Warm Signal just a distraction from your data breach? Julian froze for half a second as camera flashes hit his glasses. Dana appeared at his side, ushering him toward the private elevator. Don't answer here, she whispered. Inside the lift, she pressed the top floor. Some rival company leaked internal memos, she said. They're spinning your project as a cover-up. Julian exhaled slowly, his reflection fractured in the mirror wall. Then I'll tell the truth. All of it. Julian, Dana warned, if this goes wrong, you'll tank the stock price and the board will... He turned to her. I don't care about the stock price. I care about the girl they're turning into a headline. Dana held his gaze, then sighed. Then say it like a father, not a CEO. An hour later, Julian faced a press room packed to the walls. Cameras clicked. The air hummed with tension. He stood behind the podium, no script in hand, only the truth that had already changed him. "You've all heard rumors," he began, voice calm but unwavering, "about a rescue, a girl, and why I've spent the last week building something called Warm Signal. Some of you think it's an act of charity, or worse, damage control." He paused, letting the murmurs settle. "But this isn't about optics. It's about people. A few days ago, during the blizzard, I met a young girl named Lena. She and her dog were walking through a whiteout. No coat, no boots, nowhere safe to go. That meeting didn't just remind me of the cracks in our city's systems. It reminded me of the cracks in my own life." He glanced toward the side door, where Lena sat quietly with Dana, small under the press lights but unflinching. "She's not a headline," Julian continued. "She's my daughter, and the reason I'm building something that outlives us all." A silence fell heavy and complete. "I failed someone I loved once," he said, voice lower now. "I won't do it again. Warm Signal isn't about public image. It's about accountability. It's about connection. It's about making sure no one gets left outside when the storm comes." He looked directly into the cameras. "If that costs me contracts, so be it. We can rebuild revenue. We can't rebuild lives." When he stepped away from the podium, flashes exploded, but the noise no longer felt hostile. It sounded like release. Donna caught his arm on the way out. "You just turned a scandal into sincerity," she murmured. "You're either the luckiest man alive or the bravest." Julian smiled faintly. "Maybe both." That night, he returned home to find Lena and Rocket waiting by the window. The city below glowed orange under streetlights. Snow still swirling in lazy arcs. "I saw you on TV," she said. "You didn't hide me." "I never will," he replied. She nodded slowly, then reached into her pocket. "I have something." She pulled out the cracked locket, its hinge still weak, and opened it to reveal the faded Polaroid. They're two halves of one story. Julian reached into his wallet and took out his half, still perfectly preserved. Together they aligned the torn edges. The seam disappeared. Lena's voice trembled. "Mom said you could find patterns in storms." Julian smiled through wet eyes. "She was right, and you're the most beautiful one I've ever found." She leaned against him, small hand gripping his sleeve. Outside the wind moaned, but inside the silence was full of something stronger than heat, belonging. When Lena finally drifted to sleep, Julian stayed awake, watching snow trace soft lines against the glass. On the table, the two halves of the Polaroid now sat under a single frame, whole for the first time in years. He whispered to the empty room, "Renee, she's safe, and she's home." The storm outside kept raging, but it no longer felt like an enemy. It sounded like a promise, that this time he would never let warmth fade again. The next morning began with sunlight sharp enough to make the snow outside glitter like crushed glass. Julian's phone buzzed nonstop. City officials, partners, news outlets. But for the first time in years, he let every call go unanswered. He was in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, helping Lena frost cinnamon rolls from a store-bought kit. Rocket snored under the table, belly full of scraps. The air smelled like sugar and warmth. Ordinary, perfect, alive. "Careful," Julian said, steadying the bowl. "Too much frosting and they'll slide right off the tray." Lena giggled. "Then they'll look like snowdrifts. We should call them winter rolls." He smiled, letting her paint the icing anyway. "You're in charge of branding from now on." She gave him a mock salute with the spatula. "Yes, sir." The apartment felt different now, less like a fortress of solitude, more like a home trying to remember its own heartbeat. That afternoon, Julian took Lena to the North Star Operations Center. rows of glowing monitors, engineers in sweaters huddled around data streams. The hum of servers blended with the muffled rush of wind outside. He led her to a central console. This is where we manage the city's winter grid. These cameras, sensors, and AI models, they all talk to each other, warning us where things might go wrong. Lena watched the maps pulse with color. It looks like the city's heartbeat. He blinked, startled by the poetry of it. That's exactly what it is, he said, and soon, Warm Signal will be part of it. Can I help? She asked. He glanced at Dana, who was pretending not to listen, one eyebrow raised. You're not hiring minors, are you? She teased. Julian chuckled. Internship. Educational purposes only. Lena smiled proudly. I'll take it. Dana leaned down toward her. Then your first rule is this. Keep him human. He forgets sometimes. Lena giggled. I can do that. As days passed, the story of Julian's public confession spread faster than the storm itself. Some networks framed it as redemption, others as weakness. But the city didn't care. Donations poured in for Renee House. Volunteers showed up daily to shovel, paint, wire, and install heating panels. Julian took Lena to the site often. They walked between half-built walls, Rocket darting between toolboxes. Workers greeted her by name now. Hey, boss kid, one electrician said. Heard you designed those dog door sensors. Lena grinned. They work. Julian stood beside her, arms crossed, smiling quietly as she explained how her idea helped warm air escape just enough to guide pets in from the cold. Watching her speak, confident, bright, alive, felt like watching spring bloom through ice. Later, as twilight fell, they climbed the metal stairs to the upper landing. The roof was still open to the wind, and the horizon burned orange against the steel-gray clouds. Looks like the world's on fire, Lena said, hugging her coat tighter. Sometimes it has to burn a little, Julian said softly, so we remember how much warmth matters. Lena turned to him. Mom said you always thought like that, half machine, half heart. He laughed quietly. She wasn't wrong. They stood there, watching steam rise from chimneys, 1,000 quiet promises carried into the freezing air. A week later, the first pilot shelter went live. News crews gathered outside, but Julian kept the ceremony small. No stage, no speeches, just candles lit by volunteers and a plaque unveiled beside the door. It read, Renee House, for those who walk through storms. Lena ran her fingers over the engraving. You did it, she whispered. Julian shook his head gently. We did it. A volunteer opened the door, warm air spilling into the cold. Inside, heaters hummed softly, bunks lined with thick blankets, and a small wing for pets, a row of padded crates and chew toys, all marked. Rocket approved. Lena knelt to greet a young boy clutching a terrier under his arm. Hey, she said kindly, you can both stay here tonight. The boy smiled shyly. Really? She nodded. Really? Julian watched her from across the room, pride swelling so strong it almost hurt. He reached into his coat pocket and touched the framed Polaroid he now carried everywhere. Renee's smile beneath the old campus arch. Snow caught in her hair. He whispered under his breath, We're keeping them warm, love, just like you asked. That night, back home, Lena fell asleep on the couch beside Rocket. Exhaustion painted across her face. Julian draped a blanket over her and sat down quietly, the city lights spilling across the floor. He opened his laptop one last time and logged into the Warm Signal dashboard. Green dots shimmered across the map. Open shelters, functioning sensors, lives connected by invisible threads. A new alert appeared. Renee House at capacity. 47 people safe. Julian smiled, tears stinging his eyes. He closed the laptop and leaned back, letting the quiet hold him. For the first time in his adult life, his world wasn't measured in data points or profit margins. It was measured in warmth. He whispered to the sleeping girl, We did good today, Lena. You, me, and your mom. Outside, the storm softened. Inside, love did what heat could not. It stayed. 3 weeks later, Chicago thawed just enough for the river to groan under cracked ice. The cold still lingered, but the city breathed easier. Renee House had been running at full capacity every night. Donations poured in faster than Julian's staff could process them. Volunteers brought food, blankets, even old guitars. Someone started calling the evening music sessions radiator songs. But success came with new eyes watching. Julian's assistant burst into his office one morning. "Channel 9's investigative team is digging," she said, nervous. "They think Warm Signal's algorithms caused that brief false alert at the data center last month." Dana followed close behind, tablet in hand. "They're claiming your system glitched during rollout, delayed an ambulance dispatch, and—" "Enough," Julian said quietly. "Let's verify the facts before we defend ghosts." He opened the incident logs himself. The fault had lasted 23 seconds. An automatic safety check, not a failure. But in the world of headlines, truth never beat timing. By noon, the story was everywhere. Warm signal malfunction? CEO under scrutiny after heroic PR campaign. Julian watched it unfold from the glass wall of his office. He could handle bad press. He'd done it before. What he couldn't stand was seeing Lena's picture beside the headlines. The girl who had once been invisible was now public property. He turned off every monitor. Dana stood near the door. "You could deny it, or pivot." Julian shook his head. "No more pivoting. We face it straight." That evening, he sat on the floor with Lena and Rocket, surrounded by scraps of blueprints and takeout containers. She looked up at him, worry shadowing her expression. "Why are they saying bad things about you?" Julian set down his pen. "Because sometimes when people don't understand something good, they try to make it smaller." She frowned. "Does it mean you'll have to stop building the shelters?" He smiled softly. "Not a chance." "But what if they don't believe you?" He met her gaze, steady and calm. "Then I'll show them. The truth's better seen than said." The next morning, he called a press conference outside Renee House. No podium this time, no stage, just a cold Chicago morning and the shelter glowing warm behind him. Cameras blinked, microphones clustered like frost. Julian stepped forward, coat buttoned, breath visible in the air. "You've heard there was an alert glitch," he said. "That's true. Our system flagged a data anomaly. 23 seconds later, it corrected itself. That's not failure. That's learning." He paused, scanning the crowd. "Our tech is built to evolve, just like people do. It makes mistakes, finds patterns, adjusts. The goal was never perfection. It was compassion." A reporter shouted, "Are you using this girl to humanize your company?" Julian's voice softened. "She's not an image. She's my daughter. She's the reason this company finally has a soul." Behind him, the shelter door opened. Lena stepped out, Rocket beside her, wearing the same winter boots he'd given her. Gasps rippled through the crowd. She raised her voice just enough to be heard. "My mom said people disappear when no one keeps looking." He didn't stop looking. The silence that followed was almost reverent. Julian rested a hand on her shoulder. "Warm Signal isn't a story," he said. "It's a promise." He turned, held the door open, and gestured toward the reporters. "You want proof? Come inside. Talk to the people staying here tonight. Ask them if they think a system like this matters." No one moved for a moment. Then one cameraman lowered his lens and nodded, stepping forward. Then another. The narrative shifted before Julian's eyes, from skepticism to curiosity, from doubt to quiet respect. Hours later, back home, the apartment glowed with the soft gold of evening. The news looped muted on TV. CEO opens shelter doors. Amid controversy, public reaction overwhelmingly supportive. Julian leaned against the counter, exhaling deeply. "That's one storm down," he murmured. Lena handed him a mug of cocoa. Mom used to say storms don't end. They just pass long enough for you to build better roofs. He smiled. She'd be proud of yours. She tilted her head. You mean ours? He laughed softly. Yes, ours. Later, Lena curled up on the couch with Rocket, sketching new ideas. Warming vents low to the floor. Skylights that melted frost through passive heat. Julian watched her, the flicker of the fireplace reflecting in her eyes. He whispered, almost to himself, "You're going to change the world." She looked up. "You already did." Julian smiled, realizing she didn't mean his technology. She meant this. The warmth, the second chances, the laughter where silence used to live. Outside, snow began again. Gentler this time, less of a threat, more of a reminder. The city shimmered beneath it, alive, connected, breathing warmth into every place it used to forget. By the time February hit, Renee House had become more than a shelter. It was a heartbeat stitched into the city's frozen veins. Every night, the lights burned late, volunteers distributing blankets, nurses checking vitals, Rocket trotting proudly between rooms with a service vest that read, "Resident Morale Officer." Julian walked the halls in quiet awe. Each face reminded him why he'd built this. Not for image, not for redemption, but for belonging. One evening, as he helped stack new thermal mats, a teenage volunteer stopped him. "Hey, Mr. Hart," she said shyly, "you really come here every night?" Julian smiled. "I do." "Most CEOs don't even show up for ribbon cuttings," she said. He chuckled softly. "Most CEOs never had a daughter who taught them what warmth really means." The girl grinned, handed him a roll of duct tape and said, "Well, she must be amazing." "She is," he said simply. Later that night, the city's mayor arrived unannounced. Her security detail fanned through the entryway, breath fogging in the cold. "Julian," she said warmly, shaking his hand, "I wanted to see it for myself. Every shelter's full this week. Yours is the only one still running without outages." Julian nodded. "The system learns fast. It redirects resources automatically. No one sleeps outside if we can help it." The mayor glanced around. "The press is calling it the compassion algorithm. You should trademark it." Julian shook his head. "You can't trademark humanity." She smiled at that. "Then maybe you can teach the rest of us how to code it." Lena appeared then, carrying a tray of cocoa cups, Rocket padding behind her. "Hi," she said shyly. "I made these. We always serve cocoa on the coldest nights." The mayor's expression softened. "You must be the inspiration everyone keeps talking about." Lena blushed. "I just help." Julian looked down at her with quiet pride. She's the reason help became policy. The following morning, North Star's internal dashboard lit up with new numbers. Emergency response times down 14%, frost-related injuries down 23%, homeless intake doubled, but survival rate near 100%. Julian stared at the data, then at the family photo now framed beside his monitors. The Polaroid halves perfectly joined. Renee's smile caught forever between falling snow. He whispered, "We're getting there, love." Dana entered with coffee. "You see the latest metrics?" He nodded. "It's working." She leaned against the desk. "You realize the city's about to expand your program to 6 boroughs. They'll want you to speak at the announcement." He hesitated. "Let Lena speak instead." Dana blinked. "Your daughter?" He smiled. "Who better to explain what warmth feels like?" The announcement day came with a sky like brushed steel and crowds that spilled onto the icy plaza outside City Hall. News vans lined the streets. Banners fluttered. Warm signal. A new chapter in urban care. Julian stood beside the mayor and Dana, but it was Lena who stepped to the microphone. She looked tiny against the backdrop of skyscrapers, a wool hat tugged low over her ears. The cracked snowflake locket gleaming at her throat. "My mom used to say you can't stop the cold," she began, voice steady, "but you can keep someone else from freezing." The crowd quieted. Even the wind seemed to listen. She sang when radiators hissed, Lena continued, and told me that warmth is just what happens when people share what they have. My dad built machines that saw danger coming, but now they see people too. Every red light on a map means someone's waiting for kindness. Julian swallowed hard, pride and grief tangled tight in his chest. Lena smiled faintly. We named it after my mom, because she believed in keeping others warm, even when she couldn't keep herself. The applause rose slow, then thunderous. The mayor wiped her eyes. Julian closed his, the sound wrapping around him like a long-awaited embrace. That night, after the crowds dispersed and the news vans pulled away, they returned to Renee House. The building glowed like a lantern in the snow. Inside, volunteers strung fairy lights along the rafters. Someone played guitar near the entrance, an off-key but beautiful version of Radiator Song. Lena and Rocket danced in circles by the heater, laughing, cheeks flushed pink. Julian leaned against the wall, watching her spin, Renee's locket flashing silver each time she turned. Dana joined him quietly. You know, this started as damage control, she said. Now it's policy, philanthropy, and poetry rolled into one. Julian smiled faintly. It started as guilt, he said. It became gratitude. Dana nodded. You look different, you know. Happier. He glanced toward Lena. She's the proof that warmth isn't a feeling. It's a choice. Outside, snow drifted past the windows, soft and endless. The storm would come again. It always did. But this time, the city had a light that never went out. The wind had turned gentle now, brushing against Chicago's glass towers like a sigh. A full month had passed since Renee House opened its doors, and what began as a single building had become a movement. Smaller shelters across the city had joined Warm Signal's network, their entrances glowing green on the live map Julian kept open every night. He sat at the kitchen table with Lena, the smell of pasta and garlic bread drifting between them. Rocket snored under the table. The city outside gleamed with the kind of winter light that didn't hurt anymore. It shimmered, almost tender. Lena was sketching again, a habit she'd picked up during quiet evenings. "Dad," she said without looking up, "when I grow up, can I work with you?" Julian smiled. "You already do." She wrinkled her nose. "No, I mean really work, like designing the systems, maybe studying engineering." He leaned back, proud and amused. "You'd be better than all of us. You think with your heart first." She looked up, her expression half teasing, half serious. "Mom used to say the same thing about you." Julian's breath caught, then softened into a smile. Then maybe she was right twice. That weekend, Renee House hosted a small ceremony, a thank you for volunteers and staff. The cafeteria buzzed with chatter, the scent of chili and cornbread filling the air. Someone had taped construction paper snowflakes to the walls. A cardboard sign read, "You kept Chicago warm." Julian stood near the stage, surrounded by people who once would have been statistics in his reports. Now they were faces, names, and laughter he knew by sound. The mayor stepped up to the microphone, clapping her hands to quiet the room. "Before we start, I want to recognize the person who turned an idea into something that saved real lives this winter," she said. "Julian Hart." Applause erupted. Julian raised a hand, embarrassed but grateful. He glanced at Lena, who was grinning from the front row, Rocket's head on her lap. He stepped to the mic, clearing his throat. "If you'd told me a year ago that I'd be standing here talking about shelter instead of sensors, I'd have laughed. But the truth is, technology didn't build this. People did. Everyone in this room." He paused, letting his gaze sweep across them. "A few months ago, I found a letter from someone I once loved. She told me not to let our daughter think she was an interruption. I didn't understand what that meant until now." He looked at Lena, voice thick with emotion. "Love doesn't interrupt life, it rewrites it." The crowd fell silent. Some smiled. Some wiped tears. Julian continued softly. "So, To everyone here, thank you for helping me rewrite mine." After the applause died down, he found Lena standing near a window, looking out at the glowing city. "You were amazing," she said, eyes shining. "You think so?" She nodded. "Mom would have cried. The good kind of crying." Julian chuckled. "I barely held it together myself." She turned toward him. "Can I show you something?" She pulled out a small box from her coat pocket and opened it. Inside was a keychain, a tiny silver snowflake charm, its center engraved with 3 initials: R.L.J. Julian blinked. "You made this?" She nodded. "It's for you, so you don't forget your pattern." He smiled, moved beyond words. "I won't. Ever." He fastened the charm to his keyring, letting it catch the light. "Now I can take you both wherever I go." The next morning they returned to Renee House for what Julian called Phase 2. Engineers had installed new low-height sensors, the ones Lena had designed. When activated, they glowed faint blue along the floor, creating a soft path of light from the sidewalk to the doors. Julian knelt beside her as she pressed the control key. The lights shimmered to life, melting frost along the threshold. "It works," she whispered, awed. He rested a hand on her shoulder. "You just made the city a little warmer." She smiled. "No, we did." That evening, the two of them stood outside as night fell. The air was still bitter, but it carried the hum of hope. Soft laughter from inside, the glow of safety spilling onto the street. Julian looked up at the sign one more time. Renee House. The name gleamed silver against the brick, framed by falling snow. He exhaled slowly. "Every storm feels smaller when you stand in the right light," he said quietly. Lena looked up at him. "Do you think she knows?" He nodded, eyes glistening. "She knows. She's in every light that turns on, every warm place someone finds." For a long time, they stood together, father, daughter, and dog, watching snow fall on the place built out of love, loss, and something stronger than both: faith. And somewhere above the city, in the hush between wind and streetlight, it almost felt like Renee was humming along. 1 year later, Chicago faced another brutal winter, but this time the city was ready. Renee House wasn't alone anymore. There were now 6 warm signal centers across the metropolitan area, each connected through Julian's AI network. When temperatures dropped, digital alerts rippled across buses, train platforms, and storefront screens. Warmth available. Nearby. Pets welcome. The numbers told one story: 0 frostbite fatalities that season. But the people told a better one. The city had learned how to keep its heart beating through the cold. On a quiet evening, Julian stood in the living room, now full of life. The once sterile penthouse bore signs of a family: a worn throw blanket, framed sketches, a leash hanging by the door. He adjusted his glasses, watching as Lena and Rocket built a fort out of sofa cushions. She laughed when it collapsed. "Structural failure, Mr. Engineer." Julian laughed with her. "Poor load distribution, Miss Architect." She looked up from the pile of cushions. "When do we get to visit the new center?" "Tomorrow," he said. "They're naming it Renee House South." Her smile softened. "Think she'd like that?" "She'd tell me I should have done it sooner," he said, chuckling. "Then she'd play her radiator song until the walls stopped shivering." Lena nodded. "I can play it now. Want to hear?" He gestured to the small keyboard near the window. "Always." Her fingers danced lightly over the keys, the melody simple but radiant. For a moment, the whole apartment seemed to glow with it. Julian closed his eyes, listening, not to grief anymore, but to gratitude. The next morning, they arrived at the new shelter. A small crowd had gathered outside: city workers, families, volunteers bundled in scarves. The mayor met them at the entrance, beaming. "Mr. Hart," she said, "you've built more than technology. You've built trust." Julian nodded humbly. "I just followed the people who taught me what warmth really looks like." Lena squeezed his hand. "We?" she reminded him. He smiled. "Yes, we did." The mayor gestured to the plaque covered in cloth. "Would you do the honors?" Julian tugged the cloth free, revealing the engraving. Renee House, South. For every life that needed one more warm night. Applause echoed across the street. Snow fell in soft flakes that melted the second they touched the warm air venting from the open doors. Inside, the place pulsed with quiet beauty. Tiled floors, radiant heaters, a mural along one wall, a painting of a woman beneath an arch of falling snow, smiling. Beneath her, a line of text. "Keep her laughing." Lena stopped, staring up at it. "That's Mom." Julian nodded, voice low. "It's how I remember her. Bright, even in the blizzard." She slipped her hand into his. "I think she'd be proud." He blinked away the sting behind his eyes. "She already is." That night, back home, Julian placed a new Polaroid on the mantel. Lena, taller now, her smile freer, Rocket in a bright red bandana. He stood behind them in a soft sweater, glasses smudged, looking, finally, at peace. Beside it hung the old photograph, the one from years ago under the campus arch. The edges of the two photos aligned perfectly, past and present stitched together by snowflakes and second chances. He whispered, "You see, Renee, we made it through the storm." Lena padded out from her room, barefoot in pajama pants. "Hey, Dad!" He turned. "Yeah?" She pointed to the old photo. "You look different there." "How so?" "You look like you were waiting for something." Julian smiled faintly. "I was." "And now?" she asked. He reached out, tucking a strand of her hair behind her ear. "Now I'm home." Outside, the city lights shimmered over the snow. Somewhere in the distance, the doors of Renee House South opened, and a weary traveler stepped inside, greeted by a volunteer offering cocoa and a soft blanket. A small dog barked from the corner, and laughter answered it. In that glow, in that sound, Renee's promise lived on, not just through steel and sensors, but through warmth passed hand to hand, heart to heart. The storm had never truly ended. It had simply been met by people who refused to let it win. And as Julian watched his daughter drift to sleep, her dog curled at her feet, he knew this was the legacy he'd leave behind. Systems that never forget the human warmth they were built to protect. He looked once more at the joined Polaroids and whispered steady and sure, "Every winter from now on, we'll keep them all warm."